You're listening to the God Life Culture podcast, where faith
and what's trending collide. Welcome to the latest episode of the God Life Culture podcast. This is Eddie.
What's up, everyone? This is Miguel, and we are back, right? And we are excited that we are here for a brand new episode of the God Life Culture podcast. If this is your first time listening, welcome to the God Life Culture podcast. Last week was our first episode back, right? From a small hiatus, right? At the beginning of the year that we always take off some time. And we're glad that you're joining us today, that you are here for another conversation, another podcast. If you're not subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And we are just excited to be back and here for another conversation. Mm-hmm. And we want to remind everybody about the event that is happening March 10th through the 12th. Eddie, let us know what is happening.
Yeah, so we have this family conference under the theme As For Me in My House. We have the special guest, Priscilla Berrios, who, if you haven't heard of her yet, feel free to go back into Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to us, and search for the episodes we had her on as a guest. We had her on for 2 separate episodes within the last 1 or 2 years, and it's a very informative episode speaking on mental health, speaking about mental health in relation to the church, and that's what we'll be speaking about during that weekend.
Yeah, for sure. So we hope to see you there March 10th through the 12th, the As For Me and My House Family Conference. DM us on Instagram if you want more information. The flyer's up there. Yeah. But we look forward to seeing you on that weekend.
Yes, and don't forget, as we mentioned last episode, we're having a live podcast Q&A moment. If you're not able to make it in person, feel free to send us your questions. Is there a question specifically in relation to mental health that you would like for us to ask? Is there some other question in relation to how should a church deal with mental health or family members deal with mental health? Send those to us as well, and we'll try to get them answered on that podcast.
Absolutely. So today we want to have a conversation, and this actually stemmed from our Bible class, right, that we teach on Sundays, and we thought it was a conversation that we should definitely bring up and have on our podcast, right? And we're studying the book of Joshua, right, in our Bible class on Sundays. And, we are kind of in the middle or in the beginning of Joshua, and we were reading Joshua chapter 2, and we came across the story of Rahab, right? And it's just one of those things where I think you hear Rahab and like she's one of the important women of the Bible, right? Or common women in the Bible that you hear. When you hear women in the Bible, you think of Rahab, Mary, Deborah, right? Like there's a few women that are like, oh, like
you
those
think,
were, I think so.
Rahab is part of the group?
I think so. Yeah. And I think it's almost sometimes like a negative connotation.
Yeah, because I feel like, when we speak about women in the Bible, or when you hear about women in the Bible, it's also the Ruth, the Naomi's, the Mary. Yeah. Every once in a while they throw in Mary Magdalene a little bit, whatever.
Yeah. I guess I would say then Rahab is on that list, but maybe not the ones that come to mind immediately.
But she's on the list, and she's a very pivotal, important person in the Bible. And I think that that's, one of the things that we try to highlight in our Sunday school class is the fact that I don't think a lot of people realize her importance and her role, especially in connection to Jesus. Yeah.
And it was funny because in asking the question, like, who is Rahab? Like, people had thoughts and ideas, but they didn't have the full story, right? Yeah. And honestly, it wasn't until, getting ready to teach and all of that where you really sit and not just read the story, but study it. Right. And look up meanings of words and names and definitions. Right. Which is something we encourage people all the time to do. When you read the Bible, just don't read it. Right. Study it.
Yes.
And, so in talking about Rahab and coming across her story, we see that she was a prostitute. The Bible calls her a harlot. Right. And every time we read her name, right, for the most part, we see her title, right? We see her issue or her identity as the harlot, the prostitute, right? And it's one of those things where, go ahead, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that I think that's where a part of the debate is. Yeah. The idea that is it her identity to be called the prostitute or the harlot, or is it just a consequence of being part of something that maybe you shouldn't have been a part of, that now you got to kind of carry for your life. But because I wouldn't, at the end of her story, she's still not a prostitute. At the end of her story, she's still not a harlot. But we speak about the reasoning behind why anytime she is brought up biblically, it always starts off with Rahab, the prostitute. Or the harlot, depending on your translation.
And we also discussed how there were Bible versions that tried to get rid of that.
Yes,
right?
we did.
And more modern Bible versions that tried to just get rid of that, right? And it's one of those things where, it definitely, like you said, it adds to her story and to the power and to the impact, right, of Rahab and who she was and the story of what happened, right? We know the spies were, Joshua sent 2 spies to look over the land. They enter the home and, the king finds out that they were there, and Rahab, right, whom were the spies, they were there at her house. She protected them. She hid them on her roof. And, she basically told them how, our people are scared, right? And they're scared of everything because, we've heard. We've heard the victories that you've had. We've heard how, the Egyptians, died basically, right? And were destroyed in the Red Sea, and how God, split that sea, and, they're trembling in fear. Like, this is like a legit thing. And it's just funny because, she asked for basically their mercy, right? And for grace for her, and not only her, but for her family to be spared from the upcoming battle, right, that was coming. And it's one of those things that, in talking, she recognized what was in Joshua and, the people there, those spies, right? Like, she recognized the power, and she had heard of what God had done in their life, and it's one of those things where, we oftentimes will meet people that they know about God, or they've heard what God has done. They've heard testimonies from other people, but yet they themselves haven't experienced it, right? They themselves don't have a testimony or a story yet to share, but they've heard, right? And even just a simple, power of hearing another story, we see has impact and can cause change in someone's life, because this is what moved Rahab, right? She heard of the power of God. She heard what God had done. She heard of, how powerful they were, and she recognized there's a battle coming. I need your mercy and grace. I need for my life to be spared, and not only my life, but my family's life.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the interesting things is that when Rahab is having this conversation with the spy, she says, we've all heard of what's been going on. We've all heard about the way that God has been using his people, X, Y, and Z. And I always, I think it's important to also understand that the same opportunity that she had, which was to come to the realization that, what, their God is real. Their God is the legit God. Their God is the God of all gods type of situation, and humble herself and be like, what, I want to experience this. For example, I feel like all the other people had the same opportunity as well, but it was a position of heart. Their heart positioning was not in a place that allowed them to then be like, what, let's surrender, or what, let's ask God for forgiveness, or what, let's do X, Y, and Z. Everyone else's position of heart was different. They stood in their evil ways. They stood in their desire to not want to, seek to know who this God was, even though they had heard of all the crazy things he had been doing. So I think that there are people out there in 2023 that are exactly the same way, where you have people who hear of last week we were speaking about the whole revival situation happening in Asbury and all that stuff, and there's some people that hear that and are like, oh man, like drawn to it, like like, oh my God, like I want to experience that as well. And you have other people that are looking at it like, those are some whack jobs that are just crazy, and whatever. Position of heart, you have to be open and willing to experience God, and God will show up for that. But the rest of them were not.
Yeah, and you have to recognize the people of Jericho and Canaan were not so good, right?
Yeah,
they were people that were involved in idol worship. They had rituals and would do sacrifices, and they had a lot of negative things attached to their identity and their name, right? And they worship the goddess of the moon and all of these things. And here Rahab is a part of those people, and this is what Rahab knows. And not only that, on top of all of this, she is also a harlot and known for that, right? And her home was actually on one of the walls of of Jericho, right? Like it was right there. And, you know, when the spies kind of hear her request, they tell her, you know, she has to distinguish her house from all the other houses. And that's where we see the scarlet rope, right? That's hanging out the window. So they know that's the house to spare. Her family has to be inside the house, and she can't basically betray the spies at the end of this, right? Like you can't turn your back on us. But we see that when all of this happens, right? She's obedient to all the instructions and does what she has to do. They destroyed the city of Jericho. And this is like one of those things where it's like pretty harsh. Everyone destroyed. Every man, every woman, right? Like everyone destroyed. But Rahab and her family were spared, right? And, you know, it goes to show you the idea of that scarlet rope. And this is where, you know, I love reading the Bible, and I love, you know, the intentionality behind it all, because I know it just wasn't a scarlet rope because it had to be that, or it just, you know, was a random thing they had there. Like I believe truly, when you think of the, you know, color scarlet and the idea of blood, right? It was a representation of Jesus, even all the way in the Old Testament, right? When you want to see, you know, or question, how is Jesus in the in the Old Testament? Like, where is he? Jesus is all over, you know, the Old Testament. And we see that scarlet rope that hung out that window that distinguished her house also kind of, you know, reminds us of the Passover, right? When God told the people, right, and told Moses, put the blood on the doorposts. When the angel sees that, he's going to pass through that house and, you know, not kill the firstborn. You know, we experienced a scarlet rope, right? We experienced that redemption as well. And here Rahab is experiencing that with her family, you know, and she could have been selfish. She could have been greedy, and she could have been like, you know, save me, get me out of here, you know, protect me. Instead, she recognized this power that they have, and this power that, you know, their God has, that I've heard about. I want to experience that. I want to be saved, but not only me, I want my family to be saved as well. And I think there's a certain level of respect, I guess we can give that, or honor the idea that she could have just asked for mercy for herself. And in turn, she asks not only for her to be saved, but also for her family.
Yeah. And I think that it's also important to, you know, I also look at it from like the family's perspective as well. You know, they had to be in on the decision. And what I mean by that is that there couldn't have been a Judas in the group.
Yeah.
You know, that was going to be like, yeah. And then they're like setting them up to get caught after the fact. You know, they also had to have position of heart to understand and be like, you know what, it's true. I think, you know, we need to make this decision, not simply for the fact of our physical salvation, but also for the salvation of our souls.
Yeah.
You know, so, and I think that one of the interesting things that, you know, came up in our conversation in the class, and, you know, the second time around too, because Rahab came up again in another lesson, was the idea of, you know, identity and how, whether or not you should be bound to your identity before Christ. You know, and, you know, you have this specific example of Rahab, you know, the harlot before she met Jesus, or had received God into her heart. Jesus is New Testament, not Old Testament. And then, you know, somebody brought up the conversation of this former secular rapper who gave his heart to God many years ago, who now has that identity as well as, you know, ex-reggaetonero fulano de tal.
Yeah.
On whether or not you should be carrying that. Like, is that a good thing that when someone refers to you, they refer to you as who you used to be, or is it not?
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, there's so many people that we can think of. You know, I think of someone, you know, his name is Joshua Broome, and he was actually, and he's an ex-porn star. And every time, you know, he was an ex-porn star, he's now, you know, Christian, saved, and kind of going around, like, you know, talking about that industry and talking about, you know, all of that world, right? And, you know, giving his testimony and sharing his testimony. But every time I see him in an interview on the news or, you know, on social media and people are talking about him, it's like, you know, Joshua Broome, the ex-porn star, right? And it's one of those things where he's spoken and he said that he knows he will have to carry that with him probably for the rest of his life, right? But he also recognizes the door and the opportunity that carrying that offers him, right? And I think it's one thing for you to recognize that, yes, you can have a past. Yes, you can have a struggle. Yes, you can have something that in your past you've dealt with, right? But at the same time, it is so important that you recognize that, but you don't carry that as your identity or accept that as your identity now. So it's okay for people to recognize, hey, that's the guy that was this. That's the guy that was that. That's the girl that was this, right? Because people are so easily can easily remember, right? And it's so difficult for them to forget what you did, who you are, and all of that, right? God forgets. It's hard for people to forget that, right? But it's another thing for you to now take that identity back and carry it and live with that, right? I do believe that there is a level of restoration. There is a level of, transformation that happens in your life that you don't have to identify with those things anymore, right? Now, if people are going to, in their humanness, not be able to separate the two and not be able to recognize that and kind of call you by what you were or who you were, right? You have to learn to be able to detach yourself from that. Right. And, we see even in the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11, that is like the hall of faith, the hall of fame, right? If you had faith in the Bible, you want to be there, where it says by faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Literally in the New Testament, she's referred to again as the prostitute. Why that's there, why that's included, we don't know the answer to that. But one thing I do know is that by reading that, we can recognize that although Rahab was a prostitute, she made the decision, right, to not only hear about what God was doing, but also act on what she heard, right, and respond with, like you said, that change of heart posture and position. So can that serve as an example to us that regardless of your past or regardless of what you've done in your life, people may still label you that or recognize you as that, but, you can make a difference. And with that change of heart, with that change of, position in your life, there can be a transformation. Absolutely. But you may have to just deal with people, right, that will have a hard time separating that.
Yeah, and I feel like, unfortunately, that may be the cross you have to bear. But I also look at it from the perspective of that I feel that as Christians, we're always, or there's a group of people who look at us as cookie cutter, never made any mistakes, have never sinned, have never done this. We think we're perfect, all this other stuff. Because of the fact that we really don't go around sharing things that we may have done or things that we may have experienced
or people
in general.
Oh, in general.
In general.
I was like, wait, who are you talking
about? So, and then what that does is that it creates this false environment where people who have past experiences think that they are not able to enter into a church community because they are carrying the title of X whatever. Prostitute, this, that, or whatever. But when the Bible so masterfully allows the story of someone who had a life, that experienced and did things that they weren't supposed to do, to give their heart to God, and God honor them to the point that they are part of Jesus' lineage, I think that it creates an opportunity for us to show that anyone with any background, with any past experience, with any whatever, is still worthy of God's mercy and grace. So even though it can be kind of messed up that anytime the Bible relates or reference Rahab, it's with the prostitute or the harlot in it, I also look at it as an opportunity and a reminder for us to remember that when it comes to this walk of faith, when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to believing in God, it is for everyone, especially those that find themselves in those dark and dangerous places today.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like you said, she is listed in the genealogy of Jesus, right? And it's one of those things where, when you look at, right, the Bible and you look at how intentional and how purposeful everything is, you see in Matthew, right, chapter 1, in the first chapter, that Rahab married a man named Salmon, right, who was an Israelite from the tribe of Judah. he was a part of God's people,
Yeah.
right? Which lets us know she married someone from God's people, which lets us know she was married right, into God's people. But also there was a change in her life. For an Israelite man, right, to see this woman, right, there had to have been a change for this union to have happened.
Yeah.
On top of that, right, her son was Boaz. Boaz was Ruth's husband, right? Who like pivotal people in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
And we see that later on, right, all the way through all these different people, we end up at Jesus.
Yep.
And it's listed in Matthew 1:5. You will see Rahab's name, right, in the lineage of Jesus, because Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed was the father of Jesse. And you see right there, right, all the way it goes down to Jesus, letting you know, right, that God can take a Rahab. God can take something that has an identity that is tarnished, or an identity that is stained, or an identity that is bruised by people, right, and labeled by people. God can take that and restore it. So I think, if anything, when we read the story of Rahab, when we see, her background, and when we see the person that she was, let's not forget, right, who she then became. Let's not forget what God was able to do through her. Let's not forget her faith in not only hearing about God and not only hearing about the God of Joshua and his people, but also wanting to experience that God and wanting to be a part of that movement. Last week we were talking about that revival, right, in Asbury, and it's like, we want to be a part of that movement. We may not be able to go to Kentucky, but hey, we can start that here, right? And we can be a part of a movement within our local church, right? So it's one of those things where this should serve us as an opportunity to know that even in the most messed up areas of our life, in the most messed up, struggles of our life, God is able to restore if we let him. God is able to, bring back to life and revive, all those areas of our life that, are dead or that are struggling. And ultimately, we'll see that restoration play out. And Rahab probably never, she never got to meet Jesus and see Jesus on earth, right? And be like, wow, and have that full circle moment. Okay. But we see that she is listed as having that faith. And she is listed in one of the most important genealogies, which is the genealogy of Jesus. And, if anything, if there's something that we can get out of her story, it's knowing that God can truly restore when you let him. God can truly work when you let him. And having the courage and the faith to step out, right? You hear about something and you're hearing about what God is doing, step out and go towards that movement and be a part of that movement.
Yeah, and I think that at the end of the day, we've mentioned this a lot of times as well, where sometimes the enemy, tries to keep you hostage based off of whatever you have done in the past. Yeah. Even people that are, it was like they had a moment and then, they asked God for forgiveness, but they find themselves not being able to get back up and to get back out there because of whatever title, whatever, sin, whatever, the enemy is constantly reminding them of, or pinning on them to wear as a scarlet letter, when we need to be able to just shake that off. Give that area to God to restore, and then also flip it on the enemy and use it as an opportunity and as a tool for you to minister to anybody else who may be going through that same thing, who may have made the same mistake you did, who may have made the wrong decision that you made, and let them know it's not the end.
Yeah.
It's not the end. You make mistakes. We're human. This isn't a free pass to do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, we're human and we're going to do dumb things. So when you do those dumb things, you go to God for forgiveness. And then when the opportunity arises, use that to motivate somebody else who's been going through the same thing you were.
And recognizing the people around you, right? Don't discount them or disqualify them because of their past or because of their present, right? There are times that we can see people and think like nothing good can come out of that. Or we can see people and be like, oh, they're not at a place where they can do that. Or we can look at someone and think, yeah, they'll never amount to be that. Or, no, that's not the type of person they are, right? Don't disqualify people based on their present situation. Don't label them based on their present situation. Don't identify someone based on their struggle or based on their issue, because I'm sure so many people knew Rahab Rahab. So many people passed through her room. So many people passed through her home. They knew Rahab, right? But they also had to know the Rahab that encountered God. They also had to know the Rahab that encountered, the saving grace of God and the saving mercy of God. So when you see those people maybe in your life that are around you, and it just seems like people are discounting them and counting them out and not including them and not, thinking that anything good can come out of their life because of their present situation, be that person to speak life in that situation. Be the person to step in and intervene and let them know, no, something good can come out of this individual, right? Let's work with them. Let's minister to them. Let's help them. Let's be a support in their life, because I'm sure a lot of people were surprised at Rahab and her story. And, I'm sure that, there may be people even today that read her story and may question like how God can extend such grace and how God can extend such mercy. And that's when we truly don't understand his grace and his mercy. We truly can't put to words what that means, right? So if you are in a place or in a situation where there's people around you or there's someone around you and it just seems like no good is coming out, right? Like they're not on the right path. It just seems like, their present situation and struggle is just way too much for God to use them or for God to do something in their life. It's never too late, right? It's never too late. Be that person that literally will grab them, help them, let them know you are there for them, right? And be one of the people that then eventually they can turn around and say, when I was in my low moment, when people counted me out because of how I looked or how I dressed or my appearance or what I was going through, there was one person, right, that reached out to me. There was someone that, would always, say hello and always treat me well and always respect me, right? You want to be that person, right? For someone else. So I think Rahab, when we look at her story and we look at her situation, we can be so encouraged and blessed in knowing that we are Rahab at times.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, we have heard of these testimonies of people who, after they've, fixed their life and given their heart to God, will give those shout outs, that recognition to so-and-so who, even though they knew I was living a messed up life, never treated me different, to so-and-so that anytime they saw me, they prayed for me and they were happy to see me. So, and I think that we have moments like that we come in contact with, especially when you're in a church community where, someone has left the church for whatever reason, and then you see them around town, or sometimes they may show up to visit for like a Resurrection Sunday or a special service, and you have to make sure that when you interact with that individual that you don't treat them differently.
Yeah.
If back in the day you would have given them 2 high fives and you had a secret handshake, try to do the secret handshake again to show them like, hey, we're still like, I still love you, we miss you, we hope to see you again, that type of scenario. If they look a little different, don't point it out.
Yeah.
Like, oh, now you have a mohawk. Who cares if they have a mohawk? Let them rock. If anything, say, all right, that's cool. That's a look.
Right.
And I think it's super mega important because at the end of the day, we are not here to push people away from God.
Yeah.
We're here to push them towards God, and not even push them, guide them strongly.
Strongly suggest.
Yeah, strongly suggest.
And it's one of those things where, again, we have to remember we are Rahab at times.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have that attitude. We have, that personality sometimes about us where we have to be reminded, Ephesians 2:8, right? We have been saved by grace through faith. Mm-hmm. We all need God's grace. We all need God's mercy. You are not exempt from it because you are a pastor or because you've been a Christian for 30 plus years, right? We are all in need of God's saving grace. And at times we are Rahab, where knowing what to do, we do the opposite, and knowing what's right, we do what's wrong. And we need, right, that scarlet cord, that scarlet rope, right? That God's blood, God's mercy, God's grace to cover our life, right? To spare our life and experience that mercy that hopefully brings us to knowing him more and loving him more and wanting to do what's right. And ultimately, right, where at the end of it all, we can be, greeted by God and acknowledged by God as having faith that despite of what you went through and despite of your circumstance, you pushed through and you embraced his grace, and, you're here to celebrate with him for eternity.
Amen. So with that, we just want to say, as always, Make sure that if you haven't subscribed, that you do subscribe. You could do a little bit. Over here, I jumped and I started to do a thing.
Yes, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at God Life Culture Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. Review, leave us a rating. That helps put our podcast in front of more people. Subscribe to us on YouTube. You can check out our visuals there. And we hope to see you March 10th through the 12th for our As For Me and My House Family Conference. DM us on Instagram for more information.
Yeah, so once again, thank you for tuning into the latest episode of the God Life Culture Podcast. That's
God Life Culture.
Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.